So I wanted to shift perspective a little bit because you had mentioned, well, perspective earlier. And so I wanted to learn and hear from you, obviously working with such significant and important and storied brands, like ones that have really been around from a long time. How important is the perspective of the customer? So I know you do market research and you do brand strategy. What is your overall perspective for organizations as they start developing their brand strategies and market research? And then we can go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Voice of the customer is more important now than ever because customer and consumer habits and behaviors are changing as we speak. And it's interesting when you think about large sweeping changes, for example, the recession of 2008, 2009. There were a lot of consumer behaviors that changed that never went back. For example, shopping at Aldi might be a good example. People were introduced to other methods of handling their life affairs, and that shifted their behavior permanently. So I think it is critically important to stay engaged and in tune with your target audience, number one. Number two, we're living in an age where there are a lot of pressures. There are interests and things around social justice, for example, and changes in behavior as it relates to e-commerce and convenience and safety. And so there are these macroeconomic and macro societal shifts and interests that organizations really need to be in tune and clear about what they stand for, what their beliefs and values are, and how they will demonstrate commitment in those beliefs and values, not just in word, but in deed as well, as it relates to the talent that they include in not only their employee base, but their supplier base, their commercials and advertising, as it relates to the products and services that they provide and the needs that they fulfill within the marketplace. That's where organizations like mine can help to, for businesses to uncover, what is the pulse of your target audience, whether it's your existing consumer base or the target audience that you aspire to engage with. What are the products and services you can deliver that will ultimately solve their pain points and address their challenges in a better way than what they're experiencing today? So that we like to call it customer intimacy, is tremendously important. And the best thing is when you can hear directly from the customer. We live in an age now where it is so easy to get data. And there are a lot of, an overwhelming number of sources of data that you can analyze and draw information from. But information and insights are two different things. Data tells you the what, but when you're able to talk with your target audience, or in this case, we conduct the research, but you're right there on Zoom, listening and hearing directly from your consumers, that helps you to understand the insights and the why behind the what that you may see to complement the overwhelming amount of data.
Yeah. So at the heart of that, hearing, getting the information, getting the data, using it to make like strategic decisions. And what I really liked out of what you shared, which is, the existing versus aspirational. And I think with these like sort of winds of change that are happening, like the world is moving fast. There's so many things going on. And I think the consumer's expectation, and as I talk it out, I'm like thinking even employee expectation, millennials, there's going to be the biggest workforce. They have their own expectation, like your future staff are customers one way or the other. So being able to sort of merge those two together are increasingly important. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Absolutely. Millennials in particular have very strong values, and they expect that companies and organizations will be clear about what they stand for, and that they will take action, not just performative in nature or to quiet down, fringe audiences. And that's the thing about how marketing has really evolved over the past several years. It's gone from a one-way conversation where brands, are speaking to the target audience, to very much of a two-way conversation. And I think a few years ago, sustainability was not a priority at all, but it was special interest groups that I think really drove the pressure and the importance around ESG and sustainability. And, for the past few years, it's become a very important focus. And so it is important to engage all stakeholders, especially and including your employees, because they are every organization's greatest asset, and it can be your organization's greatest advocate or naysayer because they see it from the inside.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to ask you 3 questions that are hopefully going to set up and align. Okay. So I'll start with one, but I'll tell you the other 3. So the first one is, you alluded to it, but not maybe explicitly, is around this idea of like sort of the tokenism, like the standing out, the diversity, inclusion, like those are the things that are looking forward, but how do you like do it, live it, and not just say you're living it, because that looks worse. So that's one. The second one is around, how do we bridge that gap? I wrote them down. You don't need to worry, write them around.
Okay.
Yeah. The other is, how do you bridge that gap between leadership and the marketing insight? How do you sort of combine the two to make those best decisions? And then the third one, and maybe the final, is, in these organizations that have been around for so long, how do they start bringing about that transformational change? And we know that there's like institutions in the United States that have been doing things for hundreds of years, and around the country, governments have been doing things a long time a certain way. How do we bring about that transformational change? So basically, I'm trying to ask you how to save the world, Kristin, but why don't we start off at the first part to say, okay, what, in terms of standing out and actually like living your values versus giving lip service to it, how do we do that? And then one of the big issues that is coming up in a lot of organizations is the idea of diversity and inclusion. And I want to take that back. It's not the idea of it, it's the conversation of diversity and inclusion.
Absolutely. I am a huge believer that what gets measured gets done. So first of all, organizations and people have to start with answering the question, why, right? And so there are a lot of reasons why it makes sense, why diversity and inclusion makes sense, not the least of which is the demographic shifts in the US, the fact that when you have greater diversity, it brings about greater innovation, which has a downward impact to driving greater revenue and greater profit, and being able to service the changing demographics, not only in the United States, but in our very global economy. So I think organizations have to answer the question around why. I think number 2 is many organizations were caught off guard as it relates to the conversation around D&I and social justice, because in many ways, there are many organizations for whom this has been a priority, but it was a new conversation for others. And it is obviously a very important topic. And it's one that I continue to be encouraged by, not only the commitments that were made by many. Recently I was a keynote speaker for a corporation, a publicly traded corporation, their very first Black History Month, so people are taking this seriously and they're taking action. And so things don't have to be perfect for you to take action. I just read a mentor's article, AC Eggleston Bracey, who is a senior leader at Unilever and former coworker of mine from Procter & Gamble. And one of the most compelling things she said is that you can multitask when it comes to diversity and inclusion. Things don't have to be perfect internally for you to take action externally, et cetera. So I think it's a matter of answering the question around why, determining what your values are, and then making commitments and being able to have the courage to fail and the courage to fail fast and to learn and course correct. So I'm glad that that conversation is happening and that so many individuals and organizations are taking this seriously, because it's an important topic and it's an important aspect that is very unique, I think, to the United States, having traveled around the world.
Yeah, absolutely.